Hello everybody. We are now starting into chapter 0.3 with operations with decimals. So let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing they're going to ask you to do is to write a number in expanded form. Very first thing they're going to ask you to do. So you need to write a number in expanded form. So let's say they gave you the number 231. They want you to write that in expanded form. We're going to go ahead and break that apart as if we are going to add that number back together to get the original. So this is 231. So this would be 200 plus 30 plus 1. And if you add that back together, you would get 231. So that's the first thing they're going to ask you to do. Let's say they gave you 1,546, okay, is another number to write in expanded form. This would be 1,000 plus 500 plus 40 plus 6. Okay, and it's always going to be that addition because if you add it back together, you should end up with 1,546. Okay? All right, now they're going to ask you to continue to write in expanded form, but they're also going to give you decimals. So this section, point 3 and point 4, is all decimals. So you need to make sure that you know how to write out a decimal and know the decimal places. So if they were to give us something like 1.0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So we're just going to go ahead and look at this decimal. In any number, there is only one ones place, and it's to the left of the decimal. That's it. Just one ones place in any number, and it is to the left of the decimal. So when you start looking at the decimals and you're looking at the number, to the right of the decimal is the tenths place, okay? And when you're dealing with a decimal will always end in a THS, okay? It's always going to end in a THS. And it's going to repeat, okay? So it's going to mirror a whole number. So write a number here. This will be the tens place, right? TENS. Then if we continue on, after the tens place would be the hundreds place. So in the decimal, this 1 is now the hundredths place ending in a THS, okay? And it's like I said, it's going to mirror just as if it was a whole number. So after hundreds, you have thousands, 10,000s, 100,000s, millions, 10 millions, 100 millions, billions, 10 billions, and so on and so forth. The thing that's the most important, right, is that if it ends in that THS, it's letting us know that it's a decimal place, okay? So we're still going to write an expanded form, and let's say they gave you 785.462, and they want that written in expanded form. Well, we already know how to do the whole number, right? We just did 2 examples. So this would be 700 plus 80 plus 5 plus, now I have this decimal. So we need to know the decimal places. Well, we know that the 4 is in the tenths place. So this is going to be 4 over 10. You're going to write it as a fraction. So decimals can be written as fractions, okay? And vice versa, you can write fractions as decimals. Then we're going to go ahead and add. Well, now I have the 6. So it's going to be 6 over, so the 6 becomes the numerator. Here we have 2 decimal places. So we can write 2 zeros, so that's a trick. 2 decimal places, 2 zeros. Or you can look at, this is in the tenths place, and then the hundredths place, so there's the 100. Plus, we still have the 2. 2 is the numerator, over. Well, now we have the thousands place, so over 1,000. Or you could look out, there's 1, 2, 3 decimal places. I need 1, 2, 3 zeros to make it 1,000, okay? All right, so let's look at one more of those and we'll move on. Let's go ahead and do 1,000, get my marker to work here, 1,201.8463. Okay, they want this in expanded form. So let's start with the whole number. This is going to be 1,000 plus, we have our 2 that's in the hundreds place. Now this time I have a 0 in the tens place, so we don't need to put anything there, right? 0 divided by 10 would just be 0. So we're going to go ahead and just skip it and go to the 1. Plus, well, now we're dealing with our decimal. Let's look at the 8. The 8 becomes the numerator over, 8's in the tens place, so plus 10, plus we have our 4 in the numerator, 1, 2 decimal places, 2 zeros, or this is in the hundreds place, plus now we have a 6 in the numerator, 1, 2, 3 decimal places, 1, 2, 3 zeros, so it's in the thousands place, plus now I have 3 in the numerator, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4 decimal places, 1, 2, 3, 4 decimal places, so that 3 is in the 10,000ths place. Okay, so once again, that is how you would write that in expanded form. The next thing they're going to ask you to do in this section is to write decimals out in words. Okay, it's not much different than writing them out as whole numbers. Okay, so let's go ahead and, so we're now writing in words. Let's look at 0.7. Okay, 0.7. So the only difference is you're going to have to write the decimal place with it, but you're going to start out with the number just as if it was a whole number. Well, this is a 7, so we're going to go ahead and write out 7. Now we need to see what the last decimal place in the number is. Well, for this one, it's right here, right? There's only one decimal place, and this is in the tenths place, so this becomes 7 tenths, and it has to end in that THS. That lets us know it's a decimal, okay? The THS, so 7 tenths. Let's look at 0.06. So same thing, write out the whole number. Well, this is a 6. Now we're gonna look at the last decimal place. Well, that's the first decimal place. This is the last decimal place. So this is the tenths, hundredths. So this becomes 6 hundredths in that THS again. Okay, let's look at 4.8. 4.8. So now we have a whole number and a decimal. Okay, so we're going to start out with our whole number 4. Now to signify that there is a decimal here, and you only do this when there is a whole number and a decimal, you're going to use the word and. So that lets us know that this is a whole number and we're going to have a decimal. Okay, so we'll start out with our number 8. Go ahead and write that out. And this is in the tenths place. So this is 8 tenths. So 4 and 8 tenths is how you would write 4.8 in words. Okay, let's do one more of those. Let's do one more. Let's do something large. Let's do this one. There's a few more in the written notes in the PDF file. You're more than welcome to go ahead and look at those if you need a couple more examples, okay? But let's go ahead and do a large one. So this is 305.406. So start off with writing out your whole number first. We know how to do that. So this would be 305. Do not put and. Some of you like to put 5 or 305. No and signifies the decimal. So this is 305. Then we put and because of the decimal here. Now we're going to start writing out the number as if it was a whole number. So this is 406. Once again, no and. 406. Then we're going to look at the last decimal place. The 6 is in the last decimal place. So we're going to go tens, hundreds, thousands. So this is now 305 and 406 thousandths. Okay? and that would be your answer. And like I said, there's a couple more examples in the notes if you need to reference those. Okay, so that is writing decimals out in words. And there's more in your book as well. Okay, another thing they're going to ask you to do is to place in order from smallest to largest. Okay, so they're going to ask you to place decimals in order from smallest to largest. The homework has this, the test has this as well. So let's say they gave us 0.01, 0.001, 0.012, 0.2, 0.1, and 0.12. So typically when they do these problems, they're not going to be different numbers. They're going to be the same number in various orders. So you need to pay very close attention to this. So the very first thing you're going to do is you're going to look at the first decimal place in each number they gave us, the first decimal place. And we'll start off with the smallest, right? Because we want the smallest number. Okay, so for the smallest, we have 3 right here that are zeros. That's great, but they're all zeros. They're all the same number. So then we're going to look at the second digit here and then see which one's the smallest. Well, I have a 1, a 0, and a 1. Well, 0 is the smallest, so that's going to be our first number that we're going to start with. So it's 0.001 is first, so we're done with it. So now we're going to compare here. I have 0.01 and 0.012. The ones are the same. So we're going to look at another digit. Well, here, there's nothing here. So that implies the third would be a 0. So now we're going to compare a 0 and a 2. Well, the 0 is the smallest. So 0.01 would be our next number, which leaves us with 0.012. Okay? Now we're going to start evaluating our other numbers. So here, I have a 2, a 1, and a 1. So the smallest would be the 1s. Okay? I don't have another digit here, as I do here with the 2. So we're going to go ahead and add in a 0. The 0 is smaller than the 2, so the 0.1 would be our next smallest number, which leaves us with the 0.12. And now all I have left is 0.2 as being our largest decimal, okay? So like I said, when you're doing these problems, take your time because they're going to use the same numbers in various orders and they're all going to start to look the same, okay? So that's something else they're going to ask you to do. There's more of these in your book and the notes as well if you want to reference these. Okay. All right. Another thing you're going to be able to do is to write decimals as fractions or mixed numbers. So fractions are going to continuously pop up in all of our chapters the rest of the semester. So make sure you're comfortable with the first chapter that we covered with fractions. If you're still struggling, review the lecture videos, review your notes, review the book. I have extra resources online, and also you can contact me and I'll continue to help you with that, okay? So write as fractions or mixed numbers, and let's say they gave us 0.06. What's great about decimals is that there's some power of 10. So what you're going to do is you're going to take whatever the number is, and that becomes the numerator, okay? Right, that top number, the numerator. Your denominator is going to be some power of 10 depending on your decimal places. So usually you look at the last decimal place and you see what that is. Well, here this is 10s hundredths, so you would write it over 100, okay? Or you could use the trick, it's real quick and easy. Remember, there's 2 decimal places, 2 zeros, okay? Same thing if we had 0.008. You're going to write the number as the numerator. Well, this is an 8 over 1, 2, 3 decimal places, 1, 2, 3 zeros, or you could look that the 8 ends in the thousands place. Okay? Now, you're dealing with fractions, so you always make sure you reduce fractions if possible. So looking at the 6 over 100, the first one that we did, both are divisible by 2, so this would end up being 3 over 50. And looking at 4 over 1,000, that reduces to 1 over 125. So make sure you reduce the fractions if possible, unless they tell you to not reduce, which every once in a while they'll tell you not to reduce these problems. If they gave you, for example, 2.12, okay? So that's a whole number and a decimal. A whole number is always a whole number. It's not going to change. So it is going to be your whole number for your mixed number. So remember, mixed numbers is a whole number and a fraction. So now we're just focused on the decimal of 12. This becomes your numerator, just like the other problems. And we're going to look at the last decimal place. That's 100. So it's going to be 12 over 100, right? Or 2 decimal places, 2 zeros. And then we're going to notice that 12 over 100 reduces. So we're keeping our whole number 2, and this reduces to 3 over 25. Okay? So do keep that in mind, right? If it's a whole number, it stays a whole number. It's not going to change. Okay? All right, moving on. We're doing rounding now. So we are rounding with decimals. It's not much different at all from rounding with whole numbers, okay? So let's say they want us to, let's do one with a whole number first. Round to the nearest 100. Now, there may be one on the test and one on the homework that might confuse you. Because it just says 100, ends in a D. There is no THS. Well, that means you're rounding a whole number. You're not rounding the decimal. If it's a THS, that means it's the decimal. So make sure you pay close attention to that. So let's look at the number. 8,935.042. Rounding a whole number, it says 100. So we're starting in the hundreds place. You're looking at the number to the right. You're going to see if that number is 5 or greater. That means you're adding 1 to the hundreds place and rounding up. Or if it's 4 or lower, that means that they call it rounding down, but all it means is it's going to stay the same. And remember, everything else becomes zeros. So looking at this number, I look to the right of the 9, it's a 3. So that means I'm technically rounding down, right? I'm not doing anything. I'm keeping the 9 the same. Everything to the left of that number stays the same. So the 8 stays for the 8,000, right? That doesn't change. I think my marker's dying a little. Okay, 8,000. The 9's going to stay. Everything else becomes zeros. Now, in regards to a decimal, I don't need to write 0.00 and 0, right? Those are called falling zeros. They do not stay, okay? You're not going to keep those. They don't make any difference in the number. The numbers that make a difference being zeros are these zeros here that are taking place of the 10s and the 1s, okay? All right, let's look at another. And let's do a decimal. So this time, instead of it just being 100, let's do the hundredth. And let's use the same number, the 8,935.042. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and find the hundredths place, right? So that's the decimal. So here's our tens, hundredths. So the 4 is in the hundreds. Look to the right, it's a 2. The 2 means the 4 is going to stay the same, right? We're not rounding up this time. So everything else stays. So the 8,935 stays. The 0.0 stays. And this time we're keeping the 4. And the 2 would become a 0. Now, this is that falling 0 again. We don't have to write it. So it goes away. If you end up writing it, it's fine. I won't count any points off. But it doesn't need to be written. Okay? Let's do 2 more real quick. So this time, let's look at 10,000. So let's go ahead and round to the nearest 10,000. And let's say they gave us 85,231.05067. Okay, so nice large number. So the first thing we're going to do is 10,000's place. Doesn't end in a THS, so it's a whole number. So we're going to go ahead and look at the 8. The 8's in the 10,000's place. Then we're going to look to the right. What's a 5? So remember, 5 or greater is when you round up. So you need to add 1 to the 8 to make it a 9. Now, everything else becomes zeros. So this becomes 90,000. You don't need to write the 0.0000. Doesn't need to be there. Okay? Let's use the same number this time. And let's do the the 10,000ths place, right, with the TH, S. So we're going to start here. This is the tenths, hundredths, thousandths, 10,000ths place. So the 6 is in the 10,000ths place. Look to the right, it's a 7. So that means you're adding 1 to this 6. Everything else to the left stays the same. So this 6 now becomes a 7. That 7 will become a 0, but it's a decimal, so we don't need to write it. Okay? So hopefully you remember rounding. It's similar to rounding a whole number. Okay? All right, the next thing in this section, I'm not going to take a ton of time on this. You're at home, and I know you'll be using your calculators, okay? So adding and subtracting, multiplying and dividing, we'll probably do like an example of each and move on, okay? So let's say we are adding 201.305 plus 28.067, right? You can obviously clearly type that into your calculator and get an answer. Just make sure when you're dealing with decimals in your calculator, you check your answer 2 to 3 times, make sure you're getting the same thing. You know, sometimes we type something in incorrectly in the calculator, and you definitely don't want to lose those points for something silly. So when doing these problems, you want to do these vertically, right, instead of horizontally, if you were to do these longhand. And you want to make sure that you line up your decimals so they're in the correct spot. And I like to go ahead and bring my decimal down so I don't have it in the wrong spot, okay? And then you're just going to add, just like you normally would as if this was a whole number. So if we were to go ahead and add, 7 and 5 gives us 12. We carry the 1. 6, 0, and 1 is a 7. 3 and 0 is a 3. 8 and 1 is 9. 2 and 0 is 2. And 2, I don't have anything here. There's a 0, so 2. So 229.372. You can easily type that into your calculator. Okay, so I'm not going to do any more addition. Let's do one subtraction. Let's look at 6.7 minus 2.0563. Now, if you were doing this longhand, you would have to add in zeros. So you can go ahead and subtract. I would also go ahead and bring your decimal down. That way it's ready to go. And now you're subtracting as if this was a whole number. So here, right, we know we would borrow. You can't do 0 minus 3. So this would become a 10. We know we'd have to borrow from this 0, but it's a 0, so it becomes a 9. We'd have to borrow from this 0. Once again, that becomes a 9. And the 7 becomes a 6. Okay? Now we're ready and set up to subtract. So I have 10 minus 3 is 7. 9 minus 6 is 3, 9 minus 5 is 4, 6 minus 0 is 6, and then I have 6 minus 2 is 4. So 4.6437 would be your answer there. So like I said, you can type this into your calculators. That's fine by me. Just double check your work, okay? All right, so that's enough of subtraction. Okay, multiplication. Let's look at 3.5 times 0.04. Once again, I know you can do this on your calculator, but if you were to do it longhand, I would set this up vertically as if you were doing whole numbers with longhand multiplication. The difference here is you don't deal with the decimal first as we did with the addition and subtraction. You deal with that after you multiply. So you're going to multiply as if this was, you know, whole number. Okay, so you're going to do 4 times 5 gives you 20. Carry the 2. 4 times 3 is 12. Add the 2 to get 14. Now I don't need to multiply this 0, right? Because 0 times 5 is 0. 0 times 3 is 0. We don't need to do that. What you are going to do now to deal with the decimal is you're going to count up how many decimal places are in this number. 1, 2, 3. There's 3 decimal places in this number, so you're going to start here and move the decimal place. 1, 2, 3 places to the left. So your answer is 0.14. Okay, 0.14. And like I said, we're not going to do too much more here because you're going to have your calculators on you. All right, let's look at a longhand division. I'm trying to see which one I want to do. let's do, no, let's do this one. 4.2 into 13.23. So let's go ahead and divide this problem. Now, you can only divide a whole number into a decimal, right? But when you have your calculator, it does it for you. But if you were to do it longhand, you would have to turn this 4.2 into a whole number. So to do that, you're going to move the decimal to the right one place. Now, what you do here, you also have to do to this number, so it keeps it balanced, right? So you're going to also move this one place to the right, and then I like to go ahead and bring it up so that I put it in the correct spot. Okay, so you have to turn this into a whole number. What you do here, you have to do here, and then go ahead and bring the decimal up. Okay, then you're going to go ahead and divide as if it was a whole number. So 42 can't go into 1, it can't go into 13, but it can go into 132 3 times. And you're going to do 3 times 42 to give you 126. And then you're going to subtract 132 minus 126 gives us 6. And then you would bring down the 3. So now I have 63. Well, 42 can go into 63 one time. 1 times 42 is 42. When I subtract 63 minus 42, I end up with 21. Now, when we did this with fractions, this would become, you know, the numerator of our fraction for a mixed number. This would become the denominator, but we're not dealing with that. We're dealing with decimals. And we're going to keep going. So we can add a 0 in when we're dealing with decimals, and we're going to bring the 0 down. So now I have 42 into 210, and that happens 5 times. So 5 times 42 is 210. So 210 minus 210 is 0, so we're done, and our answer is 3.15. Okay, 3.15. All right, another division problem you may come across is dealing with rounding. Now you can still use your calculator to round. So they may tell you to divide and round to nearest, let's do 10th. Okay, let's do 10th. So divide and round to nearest 10th. Let's look at 0.06 into whole number 19, okay? So let's say you punch that into your calculator and you divided 19 divided by 0.06, okay? On your calculator, you're going to end up with 316.66666, so on and so forth. It fills up the entire screen. Okay, so that's a repeating 6. So what you're going to do is round, because it tells you to round to the nearest 10th. So find the 10th in the decimal. Well, this is the 10th, the first number. Look to the right, it's a 6, so that means this 6 becomes a 7. So this now becomes 316.7. So you can still use your calculator and round and you don't have to worry about doing it longhand. This is fine by me. Okay. The last thing in this section they're going to ask you to do, so we're still in section 0.3, is they're going to ask you to estimate. Now, estimating is different than rounding. Rounding, they tell you what to round to. When it just says estimate, we don't know what we're rounding to. So you're going to use what's called front-end rounding. So they said to estimate 82.3 times 5.8. So when they say to estimate, we're going to go ahead and round these numbers first before you perform the operation. Okay, so before you multiply or anything, you need to go ahead and estimate these numbers. So to use front-end rounding, that means you're going to go to the leftmost digit. That's going to be right here. Leftmost digit, that number is all the way to the left. That's as far as we can go. And then we're going to go ahead and assess it by looking at the number to the right. That's a 2, doesn't change the 8, so this now becomes 80. We're going to do the same thing with 5.8, front-end rounding. Go all the way to the left. That's the 5. Look to the right. This is an 8, so that means we're going to add 1, and this becomes a 6. Now we can multiply. So we're going to do 80 times 6, which is 480. Do not round again. You already rounded. You already estimated, so this is the final answer. Okay, this is the final answer. Just one more real quick. You may see a problem that looks like this, 8.21, and it's squared, okay? And they say to estimate. All this is 8.21 times 8.21. So remember, an exponent tells you you're multiplying this number by itself, okay? So now we're going to go ahead and estimate these numbers using front end rounding. So we're going to go all the way to the left. That's an 8. Look to the right, this is a 2, means nothing's happening to the 8, so that becomes an 8. Well, I'm multiplying by the same number, so this also stays an 8. So 8 times 8 is 64, and that is your final answer, okay? You don't have to do that again. There are some more problems, like I said, in the notes, and if you have any questions, please let me know. All right, thanks.